get down to business. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the Bible because I do systematics and we don't do the Bible. It's an old joke, but it's somewhat true. But we do look at the Bible from time to time. And I'm going to look at one key verse. I'm going to reference other things as well. But one key verse is in Mark chapter 12. And it actually has parallels in the other Gospels. But Mark chapter 12, verses 13 to 17. And this is one of the key verses here for us, kind of the foundational text. And here Jesus is in the last week of his life. This is Holy Week. And he is being confronted by several of the Jewish leaders looking to trap him. The Pharisees have given it a shot. And now the Sadducees are going to give it a try. And that's where we pick it up. Then they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to him in order to trap him in a statement. They came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are truthful and defer to no one. You are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay full tax to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay?" Now, you know the story. The Sadducees have come up with a really shrewd way to trap Jesus. They've given him a question with basically only two possible answers. Do we pay the tax or don't we? And if Jesus says, yes, pay the tax, well, then the whole Jewish nation is considering him to be a sellout to Rome, and they would basically blow him off and walk away from him in disgust. And the Sadducees know this, so they want to drive a wedge between Jesus and the people. On the other hand, Jesus says, no, don't pay that tax to Caesar. Then Rome says, we have a traitor on our hands, let's arrest him and kill him. And they're done with him. So either way, Jesus loses. So the Sadducees are really pleased with themselves. What a brilliant question, and they've got Jesus over a barrel. All right, so then Jesus responds. But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, "Why are you testing me? Bring me a denarius and to look at it." And of course, the denarius is the coin of commerce, and it's a Roman coin. And they brought one, and he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." And Jesus said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were amazed at him. So Jesus basically threads the needle, comes up with a perfect answer, and the people are just like, "Oh man, yeah, you give God God's stuff and Caesar Caesar's stuff, everything's great." And Jesus wins triumphant from that interchange, and the Sadducees are beaten again. So that's all we need to know. Jesus has laid it out. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Now we can all go home. That's it. Easy. And of course, that's exactly the problem. We have this key verse. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. All right, great, I'll do that. Well, what's Caesar's? And what's God's? And now the fun starts, because Jesus doesn't lay it out. It's kind of ambiguous, and it's a little bit nebulous, and there's all kinds of room on what exactly is Caesar's. That coin is on, his image is there, so I guess that coin is his. All right, but is it really God the source of everything? How does this play out? How does this work? And this is kind of where we enter the picture, trying to sort this thing out. And for roughly 2,000 years, the Christian church has been trying to sort this out, trying to come to terms with how we understand this whole give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God's what is God's. And I know this is not the only verse. We've got Romans 13. We've got some stuff in 1 Peter. Paul makes some other references. But we've got some other key verses. But this is really the foundational one from our Lord. And so the one time he would address this thing. So this is the big question. What's the interface like between what is God's and what is Caesar's? Now, back in the 20th century, a theologian by the name of H. Richard Niebuhr, who's actually had some time here in St. Louis, wrote a book called Christ and Culture. And people usually think 60-year-old book, so what? But this is a book that has sort of stood the test of time and is considered a classic in this whole question about the interrelationship between God and Caesar, or between church and state. When Niebuhr wrote his book, Christ and Culture, what he meant by Christ was the whole Christian church and everything the church was doing. And what he meant by culture was essentially the world around the church. So government, yes, but more than just government. Also the institutions of the world, the things of the world. So we've got Christ and culture. And what Niebuhr was trying to do in his book was actually trying to survey the landscape of Christianity. And he was looking around and saying, well, how do Christians try to answer this question of how Christ and culture fit together? And in Niebuhr's investigation, he came up with what he considered to be 5 basic models or types of ways that churches try to do this. And this is where Niebuhr's expertise kind of comes through and why he's been such a lasting influence, because these 5 models have really stood the test of time as being basic ways of thinking about how churches or how Christians go about dealing with the interface between church and state, between Christ and culture. Now, you can have lots of complaining. People say, these 5 are artificial, there's more, there's less, they're not that simple. That's all true. Niebuhr knew that. But if you're going to try to figure something out, you have to have somewhere to start. And this kind of 5 models or types helps. So, I'm going to share with you this morning, to start with, Niebuhr's 5 models. And so we're doing some really good, heavy-duty theology in a Niebuhrian mode here. So that's pretty cool. So you can kind of say, we talked about Niebuhr today. And you'll impress all your friends. German names of theologians always sound really impressive. Niebuhr. All right, so Niebuhr's asking the question, how does this thing work out? I'll try to keep the microphone more or less close, but mostly I'll just yell, and you can try to hear me. So the first one that Niebuhr suggested was what he called Christ. And if you can't see, move up. There's plenty of chairs in the front, and I'm not going to be right big enough for everybody to see the back. So come on up. And by the way, the PX, most of you know, that's an abbreviation for Christ. It's the Greek Cairo. I use this all the time as a shorthand. So that stands for Christ. So we've got Christ and culture in opposition. Or Christ against culture. Now, in this model of Christ and culture in opposition, or Christ against culture, the premise is that God is doing His work in the church, and this is a good and beautiful and wonderful work. And the world is a broken place, filled with Satan's activity, filled with evil, and is a really dangerous place, and is opposed to the work of Christ. And so Christ is invading and working in the world, but the world is around it, and so the world is a dangerous place. The church then, or the Christian, has to be very careful to guard himself from the world, and needs to be careful not to get too involved in the world, because the world is inherently evil and corrupt. So, the Christian would not involve himself any more than he has to in the affairs of the world. He'd stay away from the world. He doesn't want to get himself dirty and involved in the worldly things. That's the first possible approach, Christ against culture. Now, what I'm going to do before you start, you're already doing this. You're thinking, who's that? And that's the whole idea. But I'm not going to tell you yet. We're going to run through all 5, then we'll go back and think about how this plays out. All right, so that's the first one. Second one is what Niebuhr called Christ and culture in paradox. And in this model, the understanding is that the world and its structures, and the church and its structures, are both aspects of God's work, both aspects of God's activity. And God is working through both things to do His work. So you've got the world structures and the church's structures, which are sometimes at odds and often in conflict, but they both matter. And they both need to be there. And they sometimes work kind of together, but often are in opposition. And there's a tension that exists because the church has one way of doing things, and the world has another way of doing things, and they don't always line up, but they both are necessary. They both have to be there. So the government and the world is there doing its thing, taking care of things in the world, and accomplishing God's purposes in the world. And the church is doing its thing, and often in opposition. And it's not always easy to figure out how they fit together. And there's a tension there, and there's a confrontation frequently that's there. But it's not the sense of divorcing the world or running from it, like the first one. It's engaging the world, but knowing it's going to often be kind of bumping heads and not always so easy. And the other key thing with this motif, this model of the paradox, is that this tension is not to be resolved. It's not to be resolved. It's to continue. That's the whole idea of paradox. You've got these two things, and they just keep on banging into each other, and you're not supposed to solve it. You're not supposed to figure out how we can reconcile them. They just are there, banging heads, all the time. That's just the way it is. And it's supposed to be that way. So that's the second model. All right. third model is Christ transforming culture. Christ transforming culture. And the key word, of course, each of these comes through at one point or another. Opposition, paradox, and now transforming. The idea here with Christ transforming culture is that God is at work through His church, and Christ is at work in the world, changing the world, bringing the world into His way of doing things, influencing the world, shaping the world, making an impact, and making the world increasingly more and more Christian, and helping the world to come into line with God's purposes, helping the world to be aligned with what God would have done. And so the goal here is to transform the culture and make the culture no longer opposed to God, but yielding to God, and in fact, in line with God. So eventually, the goal is the church and the state and the government working together in this beautiful harmony that is no longer oppositional and no longer in paradox, but is transformed. And so we're in the process of trying to transform the state itself and the world itself into a Christian way of doing things. All right, that's number 3. All right. Number 4, and there's a definite, you should be starting to recognize the progression here as we're working our way down. Number 4 is Christ over culture. And the understanding here, Christ over culture, you're good. Okay, it's re-aiming, all right. Christ over culture is the idea that Christ is Lord of all and is ruling all, and actually is really in charge of everything. And His church is really the supreme organization, the supreme authority, the supreme force in the world. And the world's structures, and the world's affairs, and the world's cultures, and the world's things are all just kind of underneath the umbrella of Christ's authority. Sometimes it's more evident, sometimes not so evident, but it's always the case. And so in fact, what's happening is the world is working and doing its things, but ultimately it's always for the sake of the church, within the purview of the church, and really underneath the authority of the church, whether the state knows it or not. And so the church sees the world basically as its servants. They're to help it, they're to aid it, they're to move things forward, and they're to work with it. And the church recognizes within the structures of the world many good things, because you see, it's ultimately all part of the church's control anyway. And so we have the idea of Christ over the culture, Christ reigning supreme over it all, and the church really is the final authority. Let me just to number 5. So the 5th model, and this is Niebuhr's last model in his structure. Actually, when Niebuhr presented it, I'll get that in a minute. 5th model, let's do the 2 first. The 5th model is Christ in culture, or Christ through culture. And so in the 5th model, or we might even say Christ of culture, and that might be even better. Christ in, or Christ of culture. And in this last model, the idea is that the world and the church are actually working in concert already. And in fact, what's going on is Christ is at work through the structures of the world, and in the culture. And what the culture is doing is really, in fact, God at work. And the reason this is different from the one Christ over culture, in Christ over culture you still have the distinction, but in number 5 there's really no distinction left at all. And what goes on in the world is really God at work. So when the world is advancing forward and deciding that chauvinism is no longer a good thing, and that we need to have women being treated with equity, we need to be lifting up women, this is in fact God's purpose is being accomplished. And back in the 50s, when we decided it's time to end racism and get rid of this stuff, and we start legislating it, this push to change this racist attitude and push it out. Well, see, this would be God actually working. This is God's purposes. This is the gospel going out into the world and doing its thing. And so, governments and the Red Cross, and we see a complete correspondence there where the church just celebrates what's going on in the world and encourages these things, because this is helping to push forward God's agenda and God's work. Alright? So, these are our 5. Now, when Niebuhr presented it, he went with the extremes first. He hit the first one and the 5th one, because you see these are the extremes on the continuum. And if I had a great big wide chalkboard or a whiteboard, which I love, but you know, you get what you get. If I had a great big wide one, I'd have these all the way across the board, parallel to each other, horizontally, and you can see how it's just like a continuum, because it is. At the one extreme, you got Christ opposed to culture, complete opposition. At the other extreme, you got Christ and culture basically aligned, and everything's going on through the culture is Christ at work. Now, these are the extremes, and you have these middle views down the line. So you got the two extremes, and you got paradoxes a little closer here, but starting to move away. Christ over culture is a little closer here, but moving away. And you got the one in the middle, of Christ trying to transform culture. All right. Now, how's the fun moment? You get to vote. We're in a democracy. You get to vote. Now, your vote is, of course, non-binding and means absolutely nothing, so I don't care. But I'm just kind of curious where you stand, because what you vote doesn't change reality. Or at least here it doesn't. Sometimes out there it does. In here, it doesn't change reality. So I'm going to be asking you a question about where you think the church is supposed to be. Okay? So I'm going to ask you that question. Well, let's make it more personally. What do you think? Of these 5 models, which one do you like? Which one do you think fits best what the church should be doing? Fits best what God teaches us? Which one of these 5 is right, in your opinion? Okay? So we're going to vote. Okay? So let's start. We'll just go right down the line, 1 to 5. And, to make this fun, you can't abstain. This is the standard Lutheran response in these situations. Everybody just sits there and looks around, and people vote. Oh, okay. And nobody else wants to vote. You've got to commit. Be great. Yes?
I get a clarification. Number 5, is it Christ in the world or Christ of the world?
Christ of the world. Christ of culture. That's the preferred particle.
You're asking which one is biblical.
I'm asking which one you like. Right? See, if I make it biblical, then I'm going to tell you you're wrong potentially. So I'm just asking which one you like. Yes, sir.
Or which one reflects reality?
No, not which one reflects reality, because reality is very much open for definition. And we're postmodern enough to say, well, reality depends on who's looking. I want to know what you think. So this is really easy. This is just your opinion. You don't worry about right or wrong, just what you think. Which one of these 5 you think fits right how it should be, what you would like, how you think it should be. All right, number 1. Any for number 1? All right, 2 takers on that. Good. Number 2, Christ and culture and paradox. All right. Got 2 takers, about a dozen. Christ transforming culture. All right, several more. I'll double that. 2 dozen. Christ over culture. Okay, got a few like that one. And finally, Christ of culture. Any move that one? Oh my goodness. All right. Cool. Well, Niebuhr, guess which one Niebuhr liked? Niebuhr went for number 3. Which is not a surprise, because it's the last one he presented. So you always save the best for last. And that's what Niebuhr did. So he went 1, 5, 2, 4, and he talked about 3 last, and that was his favorite position. That's where he came down. Now, Niebuhr, in his book, put names with all of these. And he talked about who represents these various positions historically. And I'm not going to get too bogged down in the historical persons and who he put where, because that gets into some debate. But I will give you some basic markers to see, think about who represents each of these today in Christendom. And this will help me to clarify a little bit. And don't be embarrassed if you voted for something you don't like later. It's okay. It's part of the fun of this. All right. Christ and culture in opposition. This position is represented very ably by groups like the Amish and the Mennonites. This would be groups who would say that the world has nothing right in it, and we need to stay away from the world. And so the Amish do this. I mean, literally, they try to separate themselves from the world, build their compounds, build their little farms, and they stay out of the world as much as they can. They pay their taxes only grudgingly when they have to. They don't vote. They don't pay attention to what's going on. They don't care. They don't want to get involved. And so for them to go vote would actually be complicit in the government and in the state. And their big issue with the state, of course, is the violence and the war. And they're completely past this, and so they don't want anything to do with it. So they would stay completely in opposition. And by the way, some of the cults kind of fall into here as well. Like the sects, like Jehovah's Witnesses, they are in this camp completely. That's why your little JW kids won't say the Pledge of Allegiance, and their parents won't vote, because they are completely in this understanding that the world is an evil place. Stay out of it. And so we have the opposition. So that's the first group. Second group, that's the Lutheran position. This is the position, the Christ and culture and paradox. This is Luther right down the line. Luther laid this thing out very clearly in several of his early works. Can soldiers too be saved? And temporal authority, to what extent it should be obeyed, both in 1520. These are really significant essays Luther wrote. And in this, he lays down the principle of the idea that we have the church and the world both living together within God's purposes and trying to accomplish different things, not always getting along, but trying to do what God would have them to do. And since that's my position, I'll save that one. We're not going to talk about that too much more. We'll come back to that one, because I'm going to spend a lot of time there in a minute. Number 3, Christ transforming culture. This is the position of a classic Calvinist, which is morphed basically today into the evangelicals. So most of your evangelical Christians fall into this camp. This would be people like your James Dobsons or your Ralph Reeds, who are looking to see how we can make the culture a Christian culture. The people who are calling for a Christian America, that's number 3. And a lot of the most prominent, respected voices in Christendom today, the evangelical camp, are in this category, and we hear them all the time, and we get used to this, and that's what we come to expect. The goal is a Christian America. The goal is an America that reflects God's values. The goal is an America that confesses Christ. That's what we're looking for, and that's number 3. So the evangelicals are right down there with this one. Number 4, Christ over culture. This is the classic Roman Catholic view. This would be Rome. Rome would say, hey, Christ is in charge. His church runs the show. We all know it. And it doesn't matter what's going on in the world, because ultimately we're the final word. And the church, the Roman Catholic Church, has always operated this way. Sometimes they had much more compliance with the world. In the Middle Ages, what the Pope said was it. The Pope chose emperors. The Pope had his own army, would force his will on things. And so Christ over culture made sense. But it still makes sense today. This is why the Roman Catholic Church and most Roman Catholics typically don't get too worried about secular stuff. We tend to be a little bit more sensitive about, this is not being a good influence, and just kind of just embrace it all, because it's all God's world, and God's working through these things, and Christ ultimately is in charge, and it's all going forward. And you see this in the Roman Catholic attitude toward the arts, where they're much more ready to embrace all kinds of art, and theater and fine arts. They're really into that kind of stuff, because they just see this is all God at work in these culture things, and it's really our church that's far and finally in charge. So that's Rome. The last category, Christ of culture, and those of you who voted for this love it, is your classic, die-hard, mainstream liberal church. That's what's going on here. That's the Christ of culture. That the world is the place of God's activity, and when God is working, He works through the structures of this world. And so when the government starts a new social program to bring justice to the poor people, this is Christ working. It's the gospel. And that's really the key point. They don't make a distinction between the gospel and what's going on in the world. So when the world advances a new position that's going to bring racial equity and stop injustice, that's Christ at work. And that's the world yielding to God's authority. And so the church gets all excited about social programs, gets all excited about government assistance for things, and supports this kind of stuff and sees very little difference. And so the church is extremely active in trying to control the direction of the government, because they want to advance God's gospel as they define it. So those are your 5 categories with markers now with it. Yes?
So like the fifth one would be sort of like in line with the whole social justice movement?
Yes, exactly. This one would be in line with the whole social justice movement. That's exactly correct. Rauschenbusch of the 20s and the 30s, early 20th century, theologian who really perpetuated these things, and this whole idea of what we call the social gospel. You bet. That's number 5. Yep. Go ahead.
I get too off the subject, but where would Islam fall on those 5?
Islam is going to depend. See, Islam is a lot like Christianity. It's got lots of shades and lots of variety. And so you've got some Islamists who are going to be up here, and you've got other Islamists who are secular Islamists, and they're going to be more down here. And so I would say you probably could take Islam and drop it right in the same paradigm and probably find parallels. It's not, so it depends on which Islamists you're talking about. And by the way, that's an important thing not to forget. When we start thinking about Muslims, they're all over the place. And there is so much variety within Islam. We have a tendency to think Islam, and we think immediately of the Osama bin Ladens and the other guys who are on the extremes, the far end of this. And then, of course, they want Sharia law, which would be, forcing the transformation of culture and conformity with this stuff. So they have a different end game than we do. So there's differences, but there is a lot of variety within Islam. And it's also interesting, while I've got this topic on my mind, we need to recall that historically, Christians and Muslims have lived in happy harmony in societies countless generations all over the world, and that's usually been the norm. The idea that Christians and Muslims can't live side by side is a new thing, and it's kind of a weird thing because historically we've always been able to get along and live with each other in the left-hand world. And that might shock you to pieces, but it's true. Yeah.
Since you mentioned Islam, let's talk about Judaism. Do different sects of Judaism line up?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, Judaism is so difficult because Judaism has essentially reduced to more of a culture than a religion anymore. So you just do Jewish things because it makes your family feel good. But do you really believe the stuff? Yeah, that's pretty rare. And so you're going to find variety there as well. Sure. Yeah. Obviously, if you're a real strict Zionist, what you're looking for is complete alignment. Where the state and the church are basically one. And that's what you're looking for if you're a good Muslim too. Ultimately, they collapse into one. Christianity is unique, at least our position, is saying, no, we need to have a distinction here. Okay? All right, yeah.
Sorry, but it's a comment. But if you're a Hasidic Orthodox, then you remove yourself from culture.
That's right. You're going to find, like a Hasidic Orthodox, is going to remove himself from culture and stay isolated. You're going to get that. They might vote. See, there's going to be some differences. All right, one more, and then I need to press forward. Oh, a couple more. Go ahead.
Can I change my position now, or do I wait till later?
You can change your position as many times as you want this morning. That's fine. Yes. All the way back. Yeah.
Where would Luther go when he wanted the state and the government to be supportive of Christianity?
All right, we're going to get into this. Where would Luther go when he wanted the state of the government to be supportive of Christianity? And that actually fits in here more than you think. And that's where we're going to go now. All right, so let's move on. So what I want to zero in on this morning, since I am a Lutheran, is position number 2. And the reason that the position number 2 to me is a compelling one is because I think it does take into account more of the scriptural record. I told you there are more Bible verses. One of the more significant ones is Romans 13. Because in Romans 13, what does Paul say? Romans 13, 1-7. In Romans 13, Paul says, be subject to the governing authorities. Don't live in opposition to them. And he goes further, he says, hey, the government does not wield the sword in vain. It uses the sword because God has given it the sword. So be careful, don't do wrong, you have nothing to be afraid of. If you do right, you'll be praised. So don't sweat it. And that's what he says. So the sword, he says, is given to the government by God for God's purposes. Now this is kind of an extraordinary position. Now this is also added to by when Christ says to Pontius Pilate at the trial, and he says, my kingdom is now this world, you all know it. Which gives us pause to say, oh, we're supposed to build Christ's kingdom here. Jesus himself said, no, my kingdom is not of this world. So Jesus makes a clear distinction between the structures and functions of this world and his purposes. There's a distinction. And then St. Paul, though, says that you should be subject to the government. So we're saying, wow, this is not so simple. And that's why we take all these kind of scriptures, and that's why number 2 position, Christ and culture and paradox, I believe, really accounts for the scriptural data very well. It's not just because Luther said so. You can actually go even further back and see St. Augustine, who smells this way quite a bit of the time. But a lot of people try to put Augustine in category number 3 sometimes as well. And that's the truth of this. There's value, actually, in all 5 positions to some extent. And so you don't have to kind of just pick one and say that's it. But we have to be careful with where we come down and why. All right. Now, having said that, and giving you just a little bit more reason for what I'm doing, what I want to lay out for you now is essentially Luther's understanding of what I'm going to call the 2 realms. Now, how many of you have heard of the 2 kingdoms doctrine? All right. It's pretty widespread teaching, and it's not always really helpful because it can mean different things to different people. Part of the problem we have here is Luther himself. Luther wrote a lot of stuff. Some of you know that there are some 50-some, there's more volumes coming in English of Luther's writings. That's not all that he wrote. Some of his stuff hasn't been translated yet. And so he wrote a lot of stuff. So that means you can find in Luther all kinds of positions, and it's not uncommon for Luther to contradict himself all over the place. He'll say one thing one time, 15 years later he'll say the opposite. It happened all the time. And I can give you numerous examples. Does this mean that he's changing his mind? Not so much. He's usually speaking to different situations with meaning different applications. And so you speak a different word to a different problem, which you all know from real life. Sometimes you tell your kids, don't ever do that. Sometimes you tell them, always do this. And they say, well, which one is it? Depends. All right? Same idea with Luther. Now, what Luther, though, is doing is sometimes he'll say the two kingdoms are in opposition. And he says there is a kingdom of God, the kingdom of the gospel, and there is the kingdom of Satan, which is the kingdom of evil, and they are clashing, and they are in opposition, and you must battle against the kingdom of Satan and be alert and don't yield. He talks this way a lot. Two kingdoms, God and Satan. It's sort of what St. Augustine does in his famous The City of God, where you've got the city of man, the city of God, and it's very oppositional, very paradoxical. And Luther talks that way. And so he said, okay, two kingdoms, God and Satan, got it. Then other times, Luther will say, there are two kingdoms in which God is at work. The kingdom of God's left hand and the kingdom of God's right hand. My right hand. Okay, right, left, yours, okay? I know the difference. Even though I have my watch off, that's always my indicator. I just keep track of that way. So now it's the wedding ring. So the kingdom of the left and the kingdom of the right, they are not in opposition. The kingdom of the left and the kingdom of the right indicate the two ways that God is at work in the world. And they're not opposed to each other in the same way that God and Satan are. Now the problem you have is Luther will use the terms interchangeably and very freely, the two kingdoms. So you can wonder, which kingdoms is he talking about? And the big temptation here is this. We often begin to think, well, he kind of means the same thing. And so then if we're thinking God's left hand and God's right hand is really God and Satan, well, which one is going to be God and which one is going to be Satan? Obviously, Satan gets the left hand. And that's a big, big mistake. So what I have tried to do in following other theologians on this lead is I'm not using the term kingdoms to refer to the left and the right. Instead, I'm using the word realms. So the left-hand realm and the right-hand realm. And it's kind of what you've always heard about the kingdoms thing. The kingdoms thing to me is very confusing and can be misleading because people often drop that into this kind of black-white, good-bad. And that's not correct. Because when Luther talks about left hand of God and the right hand of God, he is assuming, as we should, that these are both areas of God's activity. And this is the key, absolutely vital premise you have to get right off the get-go here. Both areas of God's activity. So, what we're going to call this is God's two hands. God's two hands, God's two ways of working. And what's going on here also, be careful, you know, as Lutherans, we have a lot of these polarities, or a lot of these dualities, a lot of these tensions. Law and gospel, sinners, saints, justified, sanctified, now, not yet. We have a lot of these. We like them. And the tendency is to think, oh, they're all saying the same thing, just different words. That's not true at all. Each duality, each tension is answering a different question. Okay? Law gospel is asking the question, how does God speak? Speaks law, speaks gospel. Okay? Two realms is asking the question, how does God work today in the world? That's the question we're answering. And God works through his two hands, as Luther sees it, his left hand and his right hand. So, in the realm of the left, we have certain ways that things operate, and in the realm of the right, certain ways that things operate. In the realm of the left, the goal, the purpose, the objective, what is trying to be accomplished is the right functioning of creation. So the right functioning of creation. And by the way, when did this left hand, right hand split start? With the fall into sin. So God creates a perfect world, everything's clicking the way it's supposed to, and God just isn't working, operating, and then man rebels and puts the world out of sync with God's purposes, read Romans 8, and everything's out of kilter now. And so now God says, wow, we've got sin in the world, there has to be a sword. So the flaming sword comes to the door to Eden, and God says no more, and now we have this idea of we've got to have something to keep things in control. So the left hand, right hand starts with the fall. So in the left hand, the goal is that creation would function according to of creation. So, not merely that things are working and functioning, but we want to restore them fully. And by the way, if I had time, I would spend a lot more time on this really important aspect of this. We need to recognize that in both of these, the creation is good and beautiful and matters to God. The idea that is out there sometimes that the world doesn't matter anyway because it's all going to burn is not Christian. That's not Christian. The idea out there that somehow the material body isn't important, all that matters is your soul inside, that's not Christian. That's Greek philosophy. That's Gnosticism. It's not Christian. Christians follow what God tells us and God teaches us. God teaches us that creation matters to Him. In fact, Christ came to redeem not just a few lucky people, but the whole creation. So what Paul is arguing in Romans 8, critical text, the whole creation is the object of God's work. You see it in the Gospel of Luke. Christ comes to restore all things. Everything's put back where it belongs. That's the idea. So, the goal in the left hand is essentially, while we're waiting for the full restoration, we've got to keep a lid on stuff and kind of keep things moving in the right direction. In the meantime, we are waiting for that full restoration. In the right hand, Christ is bringing about the full restoration. In the left hand, He's keeping a lid on things in the meantime. Alright? So that's the first thing. The goals are different. In the left hand, then, we're all about justice. Justice being kind of the classic definition of giving to each person what is his due. That's justice. And that's what the world functions on in the left hand. In the right hand, we're interested in justification. And I'll try to put some nice, cute parallels going here for you. Alright, so we got justification. And by justification, I mean this in the full theological sense of being right with God. When God says to you, because Christ died and rose, you are forgiven. You are right with God. That's cool. And that's what the right hand is really interested in, declaring that good news. So in the left hand, we have civil servants. We have servants who bear the sword, as St. Paul says. And by the way, remember this. When St. Paul said, be subject to the governing authority, he does not bear the sword in vain. Who was the governing authority that Paul was talking about? It was the Roman government, the empire. And who happened to be the emperor when Paul wrote this? It was Nero. He was a real friendly guy. Really liked Christians. He was really supportive of Christian truth. This is why his garden parties with Christian bodies. He did this. He would crucify them and set them on fire to light his garden parties. Nero was not a nice guy. And so you think about, how did St. Paul say that? Wow. There's something really extraordinary going on here. If St. Paul can endorse that as God's left hand. So when you think, oh, the world, the government is so godless, it's not, God can't do anything to do with it. Think again, my friend. Think back to Nero. Think what St. Paul said. Okay? Just keep some perspective here. Alright, we have civil servants in the left hand. In the right hand, we have servants of the word. Because in the right hand, we have servants who are bringing God's truth and speaking the gospel and delivering justification. Servants of the word. So in the left hand, we have the sword at work. We already talked about that several times. And in the right hand, we have the word at work. So the sword, this is it. Boom. Throw a guy in jail. Capital punishment. That's left hand stuff. In the right hand, we don't do that. We don't punish people with the sword. We don't fine people. All we have is the Word of God, which binds and loosens. Either says your sins are forgiven or they're not forgiven. That's it. That's what we do. We have no other authority than that. We don't put liens on people's houses when they don't pay their tithe. What a thought. We don't do that. In the left hand, we are working toward peace. We are working toward peace. It's always a distant objective. We have peace talks. We work on treaties. We try to figure out how to not go to war. We're working toward peace. But we're living in a broken, sinful world. And we know that. And so we are realistic. We know we'll never get complete peace, but we keep on working toward it. In the right hand, we have peace right now. Because we have peace before God, and we have peace with one another, and this peace is a full reality even now. In the left hand, then, you can see where this is going perhaps, the law runs the show. The law rules. Now, what do I mean by law? Do I just mean the codification of civil law here in Missouri or the state? No. What I mean by law, I mean God's basic natural law. The way that things are wired. That's what I mean by law. What I would call natural law. And by natural law, I simply mean what the Formula of Concord, Article 6 says, that the law is nothing more than the will of God for His creation. That's what the law is. It's the will of God for His creation. In other words, God created the world, He put the world together, and it works a certain way. And the way that it works, that's His will, and that's the law. Now this is another topic we spend a long time on. This is a really important concept, because you have to realize that the law is not something that's just kind of arbitrary that God made up, but it's hardwired into the structures of the universe. So gravity, the laws of electromagnetism, the laws of motion, these are simply laws that God has wired into things. And same thing with moral law. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't kill. These are just wired into the very fabric of the universe. You just don't do them. And so that's what runs the show. So in the left-hand realm, we're trying to figure out what should we do. We ask questions about what's just. Well, what is just? Does it conform to God's law? If it conforms to God's law, that's just. How do we enforce it? With the sword. In the right-hand realm, the gospel runs the show. This is where the gospel reigns supreme, and in the right-hand realm, we delight in the word of forgiveness. Gospel goes out, and we have clarity that we are people who live by forgiveness. We turn the other cheek. We don't claim rights. We are living in the gospel reality. That's what we do in the right hand. In the left hand, it's all about the law going forward. Okay? Yep.
It seems to be, this is just so weird. Defying gravity then seems to be against God's law.
That's right.
So should we fly?
Well, no, truly defying gravity would be like the guy saying, I don't like gravity, I don't care. So he jumps off of the roof.
Okay.
So, now, he can defy gravity all he wants, but I'm pretty confident it will still work. Okay? Now, if I decide to try to figure out how to fly, I'm actually using other laws that God has built in, like Bernoulli effect, or force, and lift, and all this kind of stuff, and all those things that make airplanes fly, which are really mysterious, but they work. And so, in other words, I'm actually conforming to a whole bunch of God's laws, and I'm not violating them. The violation comes when I say, I know there's this law, but I don't like it, I'm going to do what I want anyway. That's where you start getting a violation. I don't believe it. And the parallel's kind of interesting. Because you can have a dude who says, I think the law against idolatry is stupid. I'm going to go ahead and sleep around. Oh, go for it. Will he pay a price? Guaranteed. Every time. Every time. Just the way it is. And it's not because God says, oh, he makes me mad. Zap. He doesn't have to. It's just built in. There will be a price. It's just the way it is. And so you violate the laws of nature, you pay. That's the way it works. All right. One last one on here then. In the left-hand realm, that's where we have, this is way down the bottom, you can't read it, that's where we have the world of ethics. Ethics. What's right, what's wrong? How do we live? Morality. True and false things. Yes or no things. That's the world of ethics. In the right hand is the world of sacraments. The world where God comes to us and simply speaks a word, forgiven. Forgiven. Justified. No performance. In the left hand is the realm of good works, and the right hand is the realm of receiving what God does. All right, now the last thing on here, and if I had room I would draw it on here, is ultimately our understanding and our hope and our confidence is that these two realms are working for two different kinds of objectives, and yet they're both God's realms working for a common purpose, which is the return of Christ. And when Christ comes at the last day, and the term we have in theology is the eschaton, so we get eschatology, which is end time stuff. So at the eschaton, at the last day, when Christ comes in glory, guess what happens? Left and right come together, and there is simply the kingdom of God, Christ's kingdom. And now, Christ reigns, and everything is put right, and now we're back into a pre-fall kind of world again, but even better because Christ has come, and things are even more than adequate than we ever dreamed of, and that's what we're looking forward to, when ultimately, at the last day, Christ simply is reigning over all and in all, and the two realms are gone, because they're just for now, just part of this passing world. But for now, they matter. Now, this is the basic paradigm. I add to this two key axioms. All right? There's no room to write them, so you just have to listen and write them down. 2 key axioms. The first one is simply this. Between the left hand and the right hand, there must be cooperation, but not confusion. Cooperation, but not confusion. In other words, we can recognize there's cooperation between these two realms, but we should not confuse them. All right? The second axiom is, between these two, there should be a distinction, but not divorce. There should be a distinction between them, but they should not be divorced from each other. And those are your 2 axioms. All right, now that you know all of this, and the 2 axioms, every question you have can be answered. And I mean that. I'm dead serious. Every question, if you run it through this paradigm and think it through, just about everything that I'm going to do now the rest of the way out drops into place. It all starts to fall together. Because that's what's going on here. We have this understanding of the 2 realms, the left and the right hand. We have these 2 axioms at work. Cooperation but not confusion. Distinction but not divorce. And it all starts to play out. Alright, coming up close on our break here. But before we do it, more things. The cool thing to think about is this. You, Christian person, living here in this left-hand world, and fully justified before God in the right-hand reality. And by the way, this is a heavy 2 kinds of righteousness thing, but that's another topic for another time. So much to do and just so little time. You live in both of these realities all the time. And in fact, that's really what holds these 2 together, is you, the Christian person, who lives happily in both realms. That's what you do. Because you are always God's forgiven, justified child, made right, hearing the word of the sacrament, hearing the word of forgiveness that says, clean. Washed clean, my child. What have I done to deserve this? Nothing. It's all gift. It's all grace. And you then have responsibilities in the left-hand realm where you go out and you work toward justice, enforcing the law, thinking about ethics, recognizing the place of the sword, and try to make the world a better place for a while. Try to keep a lid on things. Try to staunch the bleeding a little bit. Because the world out there is really messed up. And it's really broken. And sin has really done a number on God's good creation. And we see it all around us. We see the groaning of creation. We see the suffering and the bleeding. And so you as a Christian go out into that world and you say, I want to try to keep a lid on the suffering. I want to try to stop the bleeding when I can. I want to advance God's justice when I can. And that's what I'm going to do in the left-hand realm. And I do it because that's what God has given me to do. And I do it knowing I'm a forgiven child of God. And that's, by the way, separate topic, does my performance over here make God love me more? No! Come on. You're Lutheran. You know that. Does my performance over here assure my salvation? No. No, of course not. Different thing altogether. That's why you have the 2 realms. See, the gospel over here and all over here. And we've got to keep this thing straight. Alright, now, this is all the fun we need. Now we start playing it out. And we'll do that after the break. Alright, so, I'm going to have some dedicated Q&A time at the end, and I want to give you that chance, because I promised you, questions you had, you could answer. By the way, hi Zach. It's great you're listening this morning. He's the guy in Turkey. So, it's probably why he's listening. Alright, so, this is the basic paradigm here. I know it's kind of hard to see this, but this is the key thing. I want to talk a little bit more about this, then I want to share with you a little more information, and then we should be in a good position to start getting to the concrete questions about things like an election in a couple of weeks, which is kind of on everybody's mind. So, as we're thinking about this, then, we need to recognize this interface is really quite interesting. Because, as I said, there should be cooperation but not confusion, and there should be distinction but not divorce. This is one of the reasons why a lot of Christians think, oh, the Lutheran idea of the 2 realms, that's what Jefferson was teaching, Thomas Jefferson, when he talked about the separation of church and state. And I would say, not at all. Not at all. What Jefferson was envisioning was a wall of separation. He wanted, essentially, a divorce. He wanted people to go to the church, get moral. That's all he really wanted, frankly. He didn't care about Christ at all. He just wanted the morality. He wanted people to go to church and get moral, and get some truth, and get some, grounding for their ethical life, and then come over to the politics and be good people. That's what he wanted. But did he want the church trying to tell the government how to do stuff? No chance. No chance. He wanted that kept nicely sanctioned off. Luther did not want this. Luther wanted distinction but not divorce. And that gets back to the question way in the back earlier about, so what would Luther have wanted with the government fitting in? Well, see, that's why there's the cooperation. Because do they work together? They should, and they can. Recognizing the two different goals, the two different objectives. But they can cooperate, and there can be some things working out here rather nicely. So that's the first thing. The other thing we have to be careful of is we don't want to divorce them, but we also don't want to run them together into one big mess. And that's another problem. So both of these are real temptations. The one is to kind of separate them off so that they don't inform each other at all. The other one is to blend them so much together that there's no distinction left. And that, I believe, is a real temptation for a lot of us Christians today. Because, frankly, a lot of evangelicals are doing exactly that. They see there's no difference basically between God and America and apple pie and mom and guns, and it's all just part of being an American Christian, and yeah, we all believe in Jesus and it's all good. And it creates a ton of confusion. Because there are distinctions between them. They're not doing the same thing. But we have this tendency to kind of run it all together. Classic example is this common thing you hear of, the goal is a Christian America. I disagree. I don't think the goal is a Christian America. My goal is for everybody to hear about the forgiveness of sins in Christ and become a Christian. I want that. That's my right-hand goal. But the left-hand goal is very simple. I just want the world to be just. I just want the world to promote the law and to do right things. That's enough. So my goal for America is for every individual person to be a Christian, but for the country to just be just and moral. That's enough. So does that mean I need my leader to stand up and tell everybody they should be a Christian? No. I want my leader, president or senator or whoever, to stand up and tell people, this is what is just. Do this. Because it's right. Not, you should all be Christians. See, that's two different things. The right hand takes care of the Christian stuff. The left hand takes care of the justice stuff. Now, don't ask yet. Let me go a little further. So let me clarify this. So that means I'm keeping the two goals distinct, because they're different. In the left hand, it's enough to have justice. In the right hand, the goal is justification. People knowing they're right with God. That's a very different thing. Now, there's clearly some overlap, because right-hand people tend to be tuned into God's truth. And that's one of the things we do for the left hand. When the left hand is dropping the ball and not being just, do we do something? Yeah. We say, stop it. Be just. And stop doing what's wrong. We do that. But do we also then say, everybody on the left hand needs to go to church because they need to worship God and become Christian? No, that's a left hand thing. We don't do that kind of stuff. That's a right hand reality. We talk about right hand stuff in right hand times, left hand stuff in left hand times, and we need to keep them straight. They're two different things. Now let me go a little further here. So, in the left hand, that's where you work and do your vocations. And if I had hours of time with you, I'd spend time unpacking vocation. Vocation is essentially the things that God has given you to do in your life. It's not just your job, it's also, if you're married, taking care of your spouse. If you've got kids, taking care of your kids. If you've got neighbors, being a good neighbor. If you drive a car, being a good driver. All that stuff is part of vocation. Where do vocations happen? In the left-hand realm. They're left-hand things. So I do my vocation for the sake of the world working the way it's supposed to. I do my job because I want to serve my neighbor well in the left-hand realm. And that's where it happens. And I do it always as a forgiven child of God, and I know God's forgiveness, and I delight in that, but I'm serving the left hand for the sake of the left hand, and delighting in the forgiveness I have, and I keep them straight. They're kind of two different things. So, this plays out in some interesting ways. For example, there's a story that illustrates this rather nicely. There was a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod policeman, he made it in the Reporter, or one of those witnesses a few years back, who was tracking down a serial killer, because he was a law enforcement officer up in the Northwest somewhere. He tracked down a serial killer, got the guy, got his man, got him off the streets, threw him in jail, gotcha. Then he went home, put on his civilian clothes, came back, went into the jail cell, and sat down with the guy and shared the gospel of Christ with him. Now, that's getting the left hand, right hand stuff straight. So if the guy becomes a Christian, you say, oh great, you're a Christian, you can go now. Of course not. There's a left hand reality going on here. Guy's a serial killer, he needs to be put away. He needs to be dealt with according to the left-hand realm. But in the right-hand realm, I want him to know about Christ and his standing before God. I want him to know forgiveness. So I make sure I deliver that, but I also make sure I'm doing my left-hand thing. And that policeman got it exactly right. He does his left-hand thing, and he does his right-hand thing. You guys do the same thing. You go out to your vocations, you go out to your jobs, and you do your left-hand thing. Always looking for opportunities to speak the gospel of Christ into those situations. And that's how we function as God's people, living in both realms. But we keep them straight. We know the difference. There's left-hand stuff, and there's right-hand stuff. And they're very distinct. And we need to keep that straight. So you have responsibilities in both places. Here, you go and you hear the word. You receive the sacrament. You support the work of the church. You delight in your justification. Here, you fight for justice. You recognize the breach of the sword. You are supporting the civil servants. You're helping to carry out responsibilities. Voting, participating, supporting the troops, whatever that looks like. You're doing these left-hand things because God put you here to do these realities. So that's where the paradox comes in. Because sometimes as a Christian, getting the interface is not easy. It's kind of tricky. And it kind of gets conflict sometimes. Sometimes they butt heads. And you have to deal with that. Because sometimes what the left hand is saying and what the right hand is saying are not always easy to sort out. But we have to kind of work this thing out. So that's the basic paradigm here, working this thing out. I'll give you one more illustration of confusion. I was driving across Tennessee a few years ago. I think it was, I don't know if it was Nashville or Memphis, one of the two cities in Tennessee. And this was shortly after the 9/11 stuff. And there was this great big billboard right in downtown. And it said, "Freedom, created by God, paid for by Jesus, defended by veterans." Now, what's my reaction? My reaction is, that's a horrible billboard. Horrible. Well, why? Why? Because it completely confuses the two realms. Complete confusion. What do you mean freedom? Did God create freedom? Maybe, kind of. Now, theologically, I'm not even ready to give you that, but that's a different issue. Did Christ die for our freedom? Yeah. Paul says that. For freedom you have been freed in Christ. Okay, so we're freed from the burden of the law, freed from condemnation. That's great. We're justified. But what kind of freedom are the veterans defending? They're defending a left-hand thing that the government has said, we're going to give you some basic freedoms, and that's a left-hand thing, and so that's what they're fighting for. We're not fighting for the freedom Christ died for on the cross. Come on. Complete confusion. And this stuff is rampant in the church. This kind of confusion. See, I'm not real crazy about confusing stuff, because I think what happens when we confuse it is we end up blunting the gospel. The gospel is the declaration of the free forgiveness of sins in Christ. To whom does that apply? Every single person in the world, whether they're American or Canadian or Iraqi or Turkish. It doesn't matter. And if we start tying that message to our flag, that gets goofy. And so that's why I do not like these little American flags emblazoned on a cross. And I see them get trotted out every year at 4th of July. Don't like it. Because to me, that's a complete confusion. The cross is not an American symbol. The cross is Christ. And it's for everybody. And am I proud to be an American? Oh man, yeah, I got good here. I know it. I've traveled overseas enough. I know how good it is. And I know the beauty of the system of life we have here and how things work. And all the complaints I have about it, all the faults with democracy, it's still a good system and it works well for the left hand. But is it God's government? No more than a king is. And to be honest, if I had my druthers, I'll take a good king over the democracy any day. Just get things done so much more efficient. Democracy just breeds all kinds of problems. But that's Plato. That's another topic for another time. So we don't need to do that today. That's not political. That's political science. We'll save that for another day. So the bottom line is, in the left hand, we're simply saying, what is God trying to do? He's trying to keep a lid on the sin. He's trying to bring justice, and it's my job to work with that. And in the right hand, the goal is gospel proclamation. And I need to be able to do both. And we can't run together and confuse them. Neither can we pull them apart. Another way this happens and gets things messed up is when people try to start saying, oh, God's grace needs to come in and invade the world, and we start trying to do things over here with the gospel. So back after in 2001, after the World Trade Centers had been hit and all the horror of 9/11, you had a lot of Christians saying, aren't we supposed to turn the other cheek? And I heard this question. You know, people, oh, Jesus has to turn the other cheek. So I guess we shouldn't be trying to defend ourselves. We see, that's what we call sentimentalizing this whole thing and trying to bring the gospel into the left hand. It doesn't belong there. Luther said more than once, the gospel does not belong in the left-hand realm, because the left hand, if you try to do it with the gospel, it won't work. He said it'd be like the shepherd taking his sheep at night and putting them in the pen and then saying, okay, wolves, come on in. Oh, you eagles, you want to come in too? Go ahead, everybody can go in. Now I'll just get along and like each other. Everybody live in the gospel. He said, it ain't going to work. Won't happen. Left hand doesn't work that way. Left hand functions with the sword. So that means, as the Christians, that's why it's complicated. You as the Christian live with these realities, but you function in the left hand and defend what needs to be done in the left hand, but not your own position. And so you get these kinds of weird things where you as the individual Christian, yeah, you turn the other cheek in your life. And you do that. You don't demand your rights. You don't stand on your rights. And at the same time, you defend the neighbor. And you stand up for him. And you help him in his situation. And this gets kind of interesting. All right. I saw a couple hands, and I'll put you off, so quick questions. Anybody? We all went away. No, not yet. Okay.
So, we were talking about justice, and for justice to be in the world, what if that person who's meting out the justice is not a Christian? And how do we
So if the person meting out the justice is not a Christian, well, I guess my answer would be, so what?
How do we know that their justice is justice?
Okay, now see, this is a concrete question. Who then can do this? Basically, anybody who's just, who's tuned into the natural law, and who's going to promote God's morality. That's what I'm looking for. And Luther went so far as to say once, he would rather be ruled by a just Turk, I'll get you again, or a Muslim, rather than a foolish Christian.
We have people saying homosexuals can be married.
Right. And so that's where we start getting into some more issues. We got people saying we can redefine marriage, and we're going to say it can be any two people who like each other a lot and are committed, they can get married. And we got people saying we can, it's a woman's right to choose, so abortion is a great thing. And it's not a great thing, but it's necessary, because a woman has to have her right to choose, and so abortion has to be available. And we should have different thoughts about that, because God has something to say about those things in His law. And so when a leader is promoting things that are in violation of God's law, we shouldn't like it. And it doesn't matter where he is with Christ. Now, see, this is where the clarity comes in. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'll go ahead and hit this one now. I'll come back to it again later. The basic criteria over here then is justice and ethics and promoting God's law, not where they stand with Christ. So when I'm thinking about a potential leader or someone who I want to be over me, my goal is this guy smart? Is he fair? Is he just? Is he going to uphold God's law? Not, is he a Christian? Because his standing before God is a different issue. Do I want him to be right before God? Well, yeah, I want him to go to have eternity. I want him to go to hell. But bottom line, his standing before God doesn't make him a better or worse leader. To a point. Because over here, the justice, natural law question is going to be impacted by his character. And often, their following Christ or their religion will impact their character. And that is an issue. Does this person have character or not? That comes into play. But bottom line is this person going to stand for what is true and what is God's law, or is he going to be fighting against it? And that becomes the criteria. That's what matters. So where he personally stands in his faith with God or whatever, I don't care.
Or he stands in God's law.
That's what matters to me. That's what I'm interested in. And now when I say I don't care, take me in context. My wife always warns me, don't say things that are inflammatory. Balance. And I try, but it's so hard. It's so much fun to say things extreme and watch everybody go, I'm good. I just love that. Sorry. So yeah, so I care because I don't want to go to hell, but when it comes to being my leader, I don't care. Whatever. Oh, wait a minute.
I'll wait till later because mine's going to be a little longer.
Okay. All right. But
The flags that are here today, I understand that.
Yeah.
Out in church, is that it?
all right, you brought it up. Thank you so much for leading that. Flags in church. What about that? So people who know me know I don't like them. Don't like flags in church. I don't think the flag has any business being in the chancel. Why? Because I think it's confusing things. As people come into church to receive the gospel, justification, right-hand stuff. And then they see the flag up there. Oh, is this a left-hand place or a right-hand place? What's going on here? See, this gets even worse when we have our patriotic services and we stand up and sing the pledge, or we say the Pledge of Allegiance, then we say the pledge to the Christian flag and we sing America the Beautiful. This is goofy. This is really goofy. Imagine yourself being in a country, just visiting, and they all stand up and start singing their national anthem and, celebrating their Finnish victories because you're in Finland. You think, well, I thought I was in a Christian church. I guess I don't belong. I got to go find an American Christian church. And tell shake on me. This has always been the way it is. No. The American flag did not appear in chancels until World War I, when German Lutherans found themselves in a rather awkward position. And a lot of Americans were saying, you're Deutsch, you're an enemy. And so, oh no, we're not. Look, we've got flags in our churches. And that's why it happened. That's where they came in. And it was just an attempt to try to deflect the criticism. Now, does that mean that I don't want any politics or any left-hand stuff in the church? Not at all. It's a misunderstanding. Should we in the church pray for our leaders? Should we in the church thank God for those who have given their lives in service to their country? Should we thank God for those who are giving themselves to serve us? Well, yeah, civil servants, we should pray for them. We should acknowledge them. We should pray for our political leaders all the time in church. And we can acknowledge the veterans who have served. So on Veterans Day, can you have the veterans stand up and say, thank you, and we praise God for you? Yes, absolutely appropriate. No problem with that. Because you're recognizing the vocation that has been done. That's a good thing. But sticking the flag there and doing those kinds of things is kind of weird. And by the way, the pledge to the Christian flag was made up about 100 years ago and has very little history. If you wanted to say a pledge to God, you call that the Apostles' Creed. Got that covered. Or the nice It's pretty well covered. And that's a little older than the pledge to the Christian flag. The Christian flag itself was made up in a YMCA around the turn of the last century. So it's kind of, not much history there. Yep.
But morals, now, the right has different morals than the left, don't they?
Does the right have different morals than the left? I would say no. Because the law that I want to have upheld is the same law over here that convicts me and crushes me. Another topic for another time. But that law of God is just the law of God. It doesn't have one law for Christians and another law for everybody else. It's just His law. And the goal then is to be tuned into that. So yeah, if I had my druthers, I would love to have a left hand that's upholding all of God's law, including things like marriage. Is marriage a really good thing in God's plan? Yes. Is divorce a really bad thing? Yes. Should people stay married? Yes. So do I think the laws against divorce should be really hard? Yes. I would love that. I think easy divorce laws are terrible. But now there are bigger fish to fry. We're getting there in a minute. Yes.
Aren't you just making a distinction without a difference when you say that I want the law in the left hand, but it has to be the Christian law?
No. It's not the Christian law. It's God's law. This is the law that is hardwired in the universe, and anybody paying attention knows it. You can find it in Greek philosophers. You can find it in Muslim writers. You can find it in Eastern religions. You find it everywhere. C.S. Lewis talks about this in his classic, The Abolition of Man. He calls it the Tao, the natural law. And he points out how anybody who's paying attention gets this. They stumble across it. Now, the natural law has limits. And understand, I don't have time to unpack all this. You can't build an entire world ethic on natural law because it's always piecemeally understood because of our sinfulness. But it's at work. And it's not just the Christian law. It's God's fundamental law wired into the universe. All right? Yes?
I'm just wondering how this all shakes out in the left-hand, right-hand distinction, say with an individual who happens to be an ordained minister who would like to also serve in a civil...
That's a great question. That's a really good question. So you got an ordained minister who would like also maybe to serve in a civil capacity. How does this play out? That's a great illustration of this. So I'm a pastor. And what's my call? My vocation is to proclaim the gospel. But where do I do it? I do it in the left-hand middle. And it's my work. It's my vocation. And so I do that. And my number one task is to uphold the gospel, proclaim the gospel, and make sure people know about Christ's forgiveness of sins. But I'm also still a citizen of the left hand. And there are things I do in the left hand. So I vote, I pay my taxes, I drive the speed limit, I do left-hand things because I'm a citizen of the left hand. And might I choose to get more involved in the left hand if necessary? Maybe I will. Maybe there is a dearth of worthwhile councilmen in my city, and so I decided I'm going to run for council because I think we need to inject a little more law and morality in this city council, so I'm going to run for council. Could I do that? I could. But when I went into the council meeting, I'm going as a Christian, understanding all of God's truth, helping people steer to the law, but I'm not going to start necessarily quoting Bible verses there. I'm going to talk about the law, what's right, what you guys all know, what we need to do. I'm going to make those kinds of arguments and fight for that, because that's the left-hand goal. Do I want everybody in my city council to get saved? Ultimately, but not necessarily for the governing of the country or the city. So I can do that. Now I have to be careful, because if my calling is to be a right-hand guy, I have to be really careful that the left hand doesn't overwhelm my activities. And that's another temptation. Sometimes people start confusing these, and they get so involved in the left-hand stuff that they start getting mixed up about what really matters, and they let go of the gospel. That's a huge danger. So I never want to let go of the gospel. That's my number one task. But I can do some left-hand stuff. I just have to be careful how I go about that. And it's up to each pastor to kind of sort that out on his situation. Because I can't really make a rule that says, that's okay, that's never okay. You've got to kind of sort it out based on what's going on with the right balance between these two. And so that's what's really fun about this. When you get this, it's a blast to actually living it. So you can do all kinds of cool things. All right, good. Now, I want to give one more little paradigm model up here, and then I'm going to lay a few more thoughts on you, and then I'll just open those up for a final Q&A, even though you've already been Q&A'ing me already. That's okay. A guy named Robert Bennett, and I want to give you his name because he wrote a really great book. Robert Bennett, get it backwards here for you, wrote a book called The Paradoxical Vision. The Paradoxical Vision. And he wrote this back in the 90s, and it was republished, and I think it's still available. Bennett is a Lutheran. He happens to be serving he's teaching at a college in Virginia. I think he might be getting close to emeritus status. And he's an ELCA. But as an ELCA theologian goes, he's rather conservative, and a lot of his friends don't like him, or the people in the ELCA don't like him. But that's Robert Bennett. He wrote this book called The Paradoxical Vision. It's one of the best treatments of the two realms that I've found. It's really good. It's a little bit dated because he gets into some historical stuff. You can kind of skip that. There's some really good things in here. And what I'm going to share with you next is just kind of being stolen right smack out of his book. And because it's really helpful. Now, what Bennett says is we need to recognize that as we're living in this tension of these two realms coming together, the left hand and the right hand, we need to recognize the distinctions about how we kind of operate as God's people in the world. And he has this really helpful illustration of these concentric rings of the things that we value and things that cause us to make decisions. So in the center ring, he calls this the central core. And the central core is essentially the doctrinal and the moral truths that don't change. So the doctrinal and moral truths that don't change. That's the central core. So things like Jesus Christ is true God and true man. He died and rose again. He's coming again. Doctrinal core. Moral core. Ten Commandments. Golden Rule. You know, things like don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. Central core things. These are fundamental. These things are just there. They're not up for grabs. They stay the same generation after generation after generation. This is just God's truth. Which is, by the way, what doctrine is. Those of you who think doctrine is people making up rules and weird ideas, doctrine is nothing more than God's truth spelled out for us to understand. That's all it is. I don't make up doctrine. Luther didn't make up doctrine. Nobody writes doctrine. God just has it. And then we simply express it. This is God's truth. So that's the central core. Now, around that central core is another ring of thinking and interaction with the world. And that next ring he calls the Christian theological reflection. So that's number 2, is reflection on the central core. So this is thinking about what that core means and how this works in our lives. This is the place of like teaching, like what I'm doing here. There are core things. Now, what does this mean for us? So like the two realms, kind of expressing this stuff out a little bit. Or a sermon, that's a really good example. Because when the pastor gets in the pulpit, what's he doing? He knows the core, and now he's applying it to your situation. And he's saying, here's what it means for you. And so this is very contemporary, very much tied to what's happening right now in the world, and is trying to make a difference. So that's the reflection on that central core. That's the next ring out, that reflection on this. So this, as Benny says, this interprets the core for each generation, helps you, the 2012, think about what that core means. We don't just quote Augustine, we think about what it means for us today, and helps us apply God's truth to the world around us. What does it mean to engage that world around us? This is where we're doing this thing. All right. The third ring out is what Benny calls the area of public policy. Public policy. So this is the area where you're actually thinking, all right, if this is the core, this is what it means, what's this look like in the world? This is where the world of like legislation comes in, left-hand sort of stuff. Policy issues, things like laws about immigration, things like laws about minimum wage, things like clean air laws, or laws about abortion. That would be out here. Number 3, policy issues. What does it look like in the policy issues? Then he even has a 4th ring that he puts out here, and he calls the 4th ring just the dynamic circumstances, the dynamic cultural circumstance. I'll get my spelling right here. The dynamic circumstances of what's going on out there in the world, which is ever-changing, is shifting around, and it can move from day to day to week to week. So now we got this big storm coming up the coast, and that's the dynamic situation. What is it going to mean to take our policy and apply it to the situation? And we kind of figure that out. What are we going to do today based on all these things? Now, what's really helpful about this is how this starts to play out. What Benny says is this. The central core is simply there. It's not up for grabs. But as we work our way out to the rim, things become less and less certain. Because we're interpreting, and then we're coming up with policy, and then we're dealing with a dynamic situation. And the further we get from the core, the more room there is for variety of thinking. So we might all agree that murder is wrong. And then we think about the application, how this plays out in our lives, like a question like euthanasia, for example. Is that wrong to take a life? Yeah, it would be. Well, now what does that mean for policy? So should we have a law that says nobody can be euthanized? Or what if the person wants to? And that starts the policy questions. And then the dynamic situation, well, maybe you have somebody who's actually on life support. What are we going to do? That's how it plays out. So here's Benny's counsel. Benny says, on the core, we need to be absolutely foundational. Boom, right there. But as we work out, we need to recognize that things get a little less certain, and we should be willing to hold a little less tightly to our positions. Now, there are 2 dangers here. One danger is we'll hit the left hand, the left-leaning, this is not left-hand, right-hand stuff, this is politically left-leaning people. We might call it a liberal position. And this is in the church, too. And he says that the liberals traditionally make a big mistake because they have a tendency to be really light on the core and really dogmatic about things in the policy. So, and the classic example of this is, if I'm graduating from many seminaries in the United States today, whether or not I believe that Jesus rose from the dead is irrelevant. It's an open question. In fact, I can actually tell the people, I'm not sure if I really believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and they'll say, okay, yeah, that's an open question. Now, where do you stand on the rights of homosexuals to be married? Well, I think they should be allowed. Okay, you're good. You can go. Or, no, I don't think I believe in that. Well, that's not acceptable. You can't be ordained. Whether you know that Jesus rose from the dead doesn't matter, but where you stand on the homosexual issue, that's a big issue. You got to have the right position on that. And the left is notorious for this. So they become very dogmatic about things in the periphery and kind of hold on to the middle very lightly. And don't think I'm making that up. Okay, I'm not making it up. This happens. Not at our seminary, don't sweat that. But there are many seminaries in the U.S. that this is exactly what's going on. Because you have plenty of Christian pastors out there now who aren't really sure Jesus rose from the dead. It's common. All over the place. Trust me on this. So that's the temptation there. Now, before you get all high and mighty and think, well, we conservatives don't have that problem. We don't have that problem. Our problem is something else. Our problem tends to be straight line thinking, where we think that the central core plays out into concrete things all the way out, and there is a right position on every way out. This is our problem. And so we all agree, this is the central core, and that means you better have this position on questions of immigration, because it's a central core issue. But it's not. You see, the policy position on whether or not we should be letting illegals stay or deport them, what we're going to do, that's a policy question, and there's room for some disagreement there. From true, committed Christian people who really believe in God's truth and are trying to uphold the core, but might disagree on where this comes out. And they might disagree very differently. You might have some who are saying, son of all that. Others saying, come on, these are our neighbors. They can stay. We need to show them compassion and some love. Come on. Well, which one's right? Well, see, that's a big question. Because see, in the public policy questions, it's not always so simple. Things get messy. There's going to be differences of opinion. And we can clash over those, how this should play out. But we can still agree on the central core. And what's really helpful with Benny is he points out the danger of this straight line thinking. And frankly, I see a lot of this. Sort of like there's a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod position on just about any policy you can think of. That's nonsense. What we agree on is the central core. But how that plays out in public policy, there's room for discussion on all kinds of stuff. All right? So this is kind of, we need to be careful about this. We can't have this kind of straight line thinking that the Republican platform is the Missouri Synod platform. What? No. That's a left-hand thing. And they got a different agenda. We're not ready to buy into that, and we're not ready to declare that. So we have to be careful of this kind of straight line thinking. Now, Benny is also very helpful, excuse me, because this plays out very interestingly in where we start kind of putting down our stakes and things that we really care about. Because if you're thinking about this, what's the stuff that we should be really invested in? Core stuff. So when something is affecting the core, we should be really invested in that. When something's more of a peripheral issue, it's a peripheral issue. I think this is really important because this tells us that there are some issues facing the left-hand realm which are core issues of God's law. And there's not room for monkeying around on those. And there are other issues in the left-hand realm which are peripheral. So should we have the flat tax or a graduated income tax? You might have really strong passionate feelings about that, but that's a public policy issue. And we can come down with all kinds of different answers. And do we need to get all worked up and say there's a Christian view on the flat tax? No, there isn't one. You might be a Christian who has a strong view. That's fine. Make your case. Go for it. But to say that this is the Christian view, that's nonsense. But is there a Christian view on taking life? I believe there is. And is euthanasia taking a human life? Yeah. Is abortion taking a human life? Yeah. And now, you maybe don't like the direction this is heading, but I am unequivocal on this. When we start thinking about the core issues, there are some things that are just violations of God's law, which should be discussed with us. And we should be fighting against them any way we can. And I would put abortion and euthanasia absolutely in that category. And I'd also put the definition of marriage in that category. These are things that matter. Now, do other things matter, like the environment, taking care of the poor? Sure. But those things, I believe, are more out here in public policy kinds of stuff. And how this plays out. Because we have to agree on the poor. And if somebody's going to stand up and say, no, killing babies is okay, I think that's a problem. I think it's a big problem. Now, if this starts to sound like, litmus test voting, so be it. We live in a culture where I think it's getting increasingly difficult to say there's gray areas on things. Because it's not. And frankly, I would be really happy if we had candidates to choose from who are all ready to say, this is the position we need to take as God's law, we all need to support life. And then we can start talking about some of these other things. That'd be fun. And we can have genuine, honest debates about all kinds of other policy issues. But if somebody's not even going to get this core issue right, what's there to talk about? What else is there? This matters, my friend. Matters a lot. And so, what I'm suggesting is, when you are taking your responsibility as a citizen seriously in the left hand and saying, who do I want to lead? Who should be in place of positions of power? Is it going to be someone who's upholding God's law and the core issues? Or is it somebody who I think is going to make me a little richer? Which one matters? And that's why, I'll say this provocatively, you can sin in the voting booth. Because when you go in the voting booth and pull your little curtain or have your little sidewalls up and nobody sees what you're doing, God sees. And you might say, oh, this is just left-hand stuff. I'm just going to vote for the person who's going to make the world a little, the America a little richer or make me a little better off. That's not the issue. The issue is, what's going to be upholding God's truth? And if I put somebody in positions of power, or I put my vote there, or someone who's actually fighting against God's law, can I really justify that? And am I culpable before God for that action? I think so. You bet. So can you sin in the voting booth? Yes, you can. Chew on that one for a little bit. All the way back.
Along these lines, I've had discussions with people who I probably didn't explain it as clearly as you did with the core value, but I talked about life and death issues being more important than some of the peripheral things. And the comment came back to me, well, there's life and death issues other than abortion.
Yes.
Like killing in war and things like that.
Yes, there are life and death issues other than abortion. That's quite right. Like war and killing in war. And that's when you look at, the candidates and say, who's going to be doing what? You see, again, to me, when you have an issue where you've got a clear violation of the fifth commandment, don't kill, and it's just going on and going on and going on, what should our reaction be? We should be livid. We should be angry about that. This is a violation of God's law. And wars, that's not cool either. I agree with you. And there are plenty of things we can look at. But see, and that's when you have to start saying, now wait a minute, how do these things kind of rank out? Because there is a distinction. And there's a difference. We all want war stuff, but there is a place for that too. And a fight for what is just. A fight for what is just. And that's appropriate. Is it cool? No. Do we like it? No. And see, in the left hand, we have to deal with lots of stuff that aren't so cool, but we do it. But we have to make a distinction between where things are. Is it central core, or we got the policy things? So I agree. It's not that simple, but there are some things that just rise up there so big. They just have to be discussed. They have to be dealt with. And like I said, wouldn't it be great if Roe v. Wade was overturned and we weren't having this discussion about abortion? And then we could talk about who's got the best policy for X, Y, or Z issues. That'd be great. But we don't have that luxury. Yes, sir.
How does the issue of self-defense, carrying concealed weapons, and things like that relate to that duality of Christian?
Okay, how does the question about self-defense, concealed carry relate to that duality? That's going to lead you to my last big point, and then I'll open it wide up for Q&A the last time we have here. And this is the last thing I want to bring up. So you led me in very nicely. I saw other hands, I'll give to you here. Let me talk about one last issue, and this is the whole question about rights. All right? About rights. And this is going to be one you're going to like the least of all. So if you want to leave quickly before you're really offended. Rights talk is not Christian talk. Show me anywhere in the Bible that it says you have rights. You can look all day, you will not find it. There is nothing in the Bible that says you have rights. Being made in the image of God does not give you rights, it gives you responsibility. Alright? So, rights talk is left-hand talk. The state chooses to give us some rights. That's nice. I'm glad I've got them. I'll take them. But is it my somehow God-given inherent rights to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? It's not. It's not. You see, that's why even the discussion about, right to life and stuff, I'm not crazy about that whole moniker. I don't like it because I think it's misleading. We as Christians don't stand on and demand rights. You don't have any. You know that. You're a creature. What you come to the world with? Nothing. What are you going to leave with? Nothing. How do you live each day? Purely of God's grace and mercy. That I'm alive today is purely an act of God's kindness and mercy. Did I have a right to wake up this morning? No. Do I have a right to have all the stuff I have? No. I have it only by God's mercy. And I'm glad. And I'm grateful. It's blessing stuff. I don't have rights. Rights talk is purely left-hand. It's an American way of thinking, and boy do we think it. It has been built into us and bred into us and cultivated and reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. And we run around just spouting rights, 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 rights. Sue anybody who steps on my rights, demand my rights, and away we go. Rights, rights, rights. Where does Christ ever demand rights? Now, I know St. Paul appeals to Caesar. I appeal to Caesar. Why did he do that? For the sake of the gospel. Because he wanted the gospel proclaimed and for the sake of the people he was serving. Not because of his own rights. Luther is extremely clear on this. You don't stand on your rights. As a Christian, you turn the other cheek. Some guy wants to rip you off? Whatever. Now, this gets a little more complicated because I also have a responsibility to my neighbor. And here's where things get interesting. Because while I won't stand on my own rights, will I defend my neighbor in his cause? Absolutely. And so, if somebody's trying to steal from me, maybe he's going to steal from someone else next, maybe I should take him down. But it's not for my sake, it's for the neighbor's sake. Now, that sounds a little fishy. It is. And that's what I'm saying, it gets a little murky here. But there's some truth to this. So like if a guy breaks into my house and is trying to steal from me, maybe I take him down to protect my wife and kids. Or maybe I do something with a neighbor. But as far as my own stuff, that's not important. I'm not trying to defend my stuff. I don't have stuff. It's God's. I don't have rights. I have gifts from God. And so this whole rights talk is kind of weird. So the concealed carry thing, left-hand thing, all right. So the state says, if you want to carry a firearm, you can do that, do it responsibly. All right. But for me to say, I have a right to carry a gun, well, the Second Amendment might say so, but I don't think we have any right scripturally. As a left-hand citizen, you can say, this makes sense, left-hand, and this is a good policy, here's why we should do this. Make your case, go for it. but don't try to raise it to the level of, it's my God-given right to have a gun. No, it's not. But it's also not your God-given right to worship. That really hits home. It's not. If the government lets you worship as you want, that's great. Enjoy that. What a privilege. But if the government takes it away, what do? I worship anyway. And they throw me in jail? Well, that's what they want to do. So what? And if they decide to kill me for that? Well, so what? Do I say, wait, I have a right to worship, you can't kill me? No, they just took it away. They can do that. And I just said, whatever. I'll keep on worshiping God anyway. It's the right thing to do. If you want to kill me? Well, fine. Bummer, but I'll keep on doing what I need to do. You see the difference in attitude here? You see, it's not like we're running around screaming for our rights all the time. And that, frankly, I get really kind of disgusted by that. And when I hear Christians screaming for their rights, what? Just shut up. Be a Christian. David, just be who you're supposed to be. Quit standing on your rights. That's silly. Yes, sir.
We don't believe in abortion. How about the state execute people?
Okay, we don't believe in abortion. How about the state executing people? To me, the state executing people is a state using the sword. And so it's the state taking a life when it's appropriate. And we can debate about when it's appropriate. Rome has what they call the seamless garment. All life needs to be sacred. And I'm not persuaded by that. I think Paul makes it very clear there's a difference. The whole point on problem with abortion is you've got innocent life. Innocent, as much as there can be. In other words, this is a child who is defenseless. And we need to come to defense. And by the way, the Christian church has always done this. More on that in a minute. I want to come back to that. But the capital punishment, or going to in war to a just war, this is the state using its legitimate sword for the sake of justice. And so if there's a guy who has done a heinous crime, does justice say he should be killed? I believe it does. And to be honest, the deterrent issue and all that stuff, I don't really care about. I just care about justice. And so this guy did this horrendous crime. Should he pay with his life? Sometimes. Yes. I have no problem with that. Now, back to the thing about Christians defending the defenseless. This has always been one of our hallmarks. The Christians have done this always. In the ancient world, and I was telling some others today, and they were shocked to know this, but the Romans had this practice of called exposing babies. And if a baby was born with a birth defect or was the wrong sex, usually a girl they didn't want, instead of killing it, you don't do that, they would just take out the woods and leave it. They did this all the time. Standard practice. Happened all the time. And the Christians were known for going out in the woods, finding the kids, and taking them home. They did this all the time. The Christian church has always done this. Come to the aid of the defenseless. Come to the aid of those who can't speak up for themselves. This is one of the things we do as Christians. This is what we've always done. And we can't forget this. All right. Yep.
I'm a pastor, and one of the things that concerns me, and I'm glad that you used this analogy here, I think it's really quite helpful. And that is that, when, as you said, you can sin going into the voting booth.
Yep.
And one of the things that concerns me is, as a pastor, I have to determine whether or not someone is fit to go to communion.
Okay.
And so, I'm to the point of saying, if you are supportive of Obama's policies of killing infants, and he's the most radical of all of any person that's ever been in the White House, and if you are in favor of his homosexual agenda, you're sinning against those core values.
Okay.
So you're actually denying your Christianity. So I can't give you communion.
Okay. So you're asking the question, should somebody who's supporting a position, and you bring up President Obama's position on homosexuality and on abortion, and if you have somebody who is actively supporting this, could you give him communion? Is he a Christian in good standing? This is a dilemma because of a pastor. That's your question. This is a fair question. Because see, as a pastor, you do have a responsibility for the spiritual well-being of those in the rail. And you should be confident you're communing people who belong at the rail. They're living repentant lives in conformity with God's truth. And this is important. What I would suggest is this. I think if you have somebody who is openly supporting what you consider to be policies at odds with the core thing, you have a responsibility to go and talk to that person face to face. And say, here's what's going on. Here's why this is a problem. Let's talk about this. And I think that conversation should happen probably more than once. Because your job as pastor and shepherd is to bring this person back into the fold. You want him to be in the fold. Now, if he becomes increasingly resistant and maybe defiant and saying, to heck with you, I think this is what's right because I like this and this and this, and I know he likes this, but I don't care. But now you're getting a more clear-cut issue. But just because somebody like me who sticks an Obama sign in the yard, I'm not ready to call him an unchristian. maybe he's uninformed, or maybe he hasn't been taught what needs to be taught, and you as a pastor should teach and educate and bring them along. If you're teaching and educating and bring them along, and they become resistant, now you maybe have an issue of communion policy. Maybe you have an issue of it's time for the minor ban. Maybe so. Because now they're no longer willing to be obedient to what God is clearly telling them, and they're saying, I don't care. That's an issue. But I think it needs to be a lot of conversation and discussion before you just say, anybody who's got that yard sign in the yard, don't come to communion today. I would not do that. Because I think there's a whole lot of, how long has it taken me to kind of lay this stuff out? And so there needs to be some teaching and some work there. But I agree with you in principle. And see, this is back a few years ago when Kerry was running, and several bishops announced, Roman Catholic bishops, that if he's in our diocese on a Sunday, he's not getting communion because of his abortion policy. Well, basically, those guys are spot on. That was exactly the right position. I agree with that completely, because he was very public, very outspoken. And if you had somebody in your congregation maybe who was running for office and taking a very public position, I would agree with that. But some guy who was maybe just a person trying to work his way through it, not well informed, give him some time to think it through. Teach him. Okay? All right, yes.
Okay, well, he was a pastor.
Yes.
He has a responsibility. And I think the majority of us are lay people.
Most of you are lay people, yes. Mercifully.
We're all kind of scared of what can we and what can't we talk about in the church.
Okay.
And
that's
and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. You bring up a good issue, and if I had more time, I'd unpack this more, but I'm not a Q&A time, and I will honor that.
Oh, I thought you were.
No, you're asking the question about, as lay people, we get scared about what we can talk about in church. Now, I'll give you some concrete things here. I believe that we, as citizens of this left-hand world, and as God's people in this left-hand world, should be extremely well informed about what's going on in the left hand. And should be talking about it often. Because it matters. It's God's left hand. These are important questions. Who gets elected? Matters. In one hand. In another hand, not really so much. We have that's that kind of two wrongs thing. Does my justification get called into question because of who's in the office? No. And does the church stand or fall based on what America does? No. But I care. Well, it's God's world, and I care. So we should care. And so that means, as a Christian, can I get involved in left-hand political stuff? Yeah, go for it. I have no problem with that. You can get involved in all kinds of stuff, trying to advance what is fighting for God's justice. That's a great thing. In fact, I would contend that if you really get this right, and you understand that you are God's forgiven child, you should be extremely active in the left hand. One of the great sins of Lutheranism is this sin called quietism. Seriously, and it's what it's called. I'm not making it up. And quietism is the idea that, God has declared me His forgiven child, and He's put the rulers in power, and there they are, and we just got to support them. And this is what the Germans were doing as Hitler came to power in the 30s. It wasn't cool. It was wrong. Now, not all of them did it. There were courageous guys who spoke up. Bonhoeffer, Sassa, and others who were courageously willing to say, no, this is wrong. That's what we need to do. See, we should be active. We're not quiet. We should be active. And it's the weirdest thing, because Lutherans have this reputation as kind of quiet, law-abiding people who don't say much. That's totally messed up. We should be engaged in this world and speaking and fighting for what's right. And are there times when we all go down and protest somewhere? Yeah. We should. Yeah. I want you to be active. That's right. Should you be putting your money into those kinds of things? Yeah. Tithe first. And then do that. Because this stuff matters. And we should be engaged. Now, I wouldn't even go so far as to say, can a pastor get in the pulpit and talk about public policy issues? Yes. Yes. Carefully, because if it's out here, he needs to be careful. But if it's a core issue, he can talk about it. There were a few years back, remember here in Missouri, when there was this big question about the changing the Constitution to allow stem cell research. That's a core issue. Because if you're going to take stem cells out of fetuses, embryonic stem cell, right, we're not talking fat stem cells or whatever, embryonic stem cells, this is a big deal. And was it appropriate for the church to address this? I would say absolutely. Absolutely. And can a pastor get into the pulpit and say, hey, there's this issue on the ballot next week. This is a classic issue of core value. You need to be aware that if you vote for this, you are voting to take life. Don't do it. I think that's absolutely appropriate. Right from the pulpit. Now, should that happen every week where it's the political agenda of the week? No. But every once in a while, it just gets so big it has to happen. Benny talks about that in his book too. He talks about these levels of influence and how the church interacts with the world. And he encourages us to be far more interested in simply building people of character who know how to function the left hand well, rather than trying to be activists as a church. So that usually is counterproductive. So should the church be organizing, rallies to support the sausage workers or something? No. But should the church be standing for what needs to be stood for on occasion? Yeah. We need to sort that out carefully. All right, Q&A time, wide open. Whatever you want, anywhere you want to go. Anything. If you got nothing, I got more.
I want to go back to rights for a minute, because I like the way you define that in the right hand, we shouldn't be talking about rights.
Yeah.
But in the left hand, isn't it appropriate, as the founders declared, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are created with certain inalienable rights, which we want to lift up above as not coming from government.
Right. So should the founding fathers are trying to lift these rights up as not coming from government, as being higher. I have issues with this, fundamentally. In the left-hand realm, I would say that if the government is going to give us rights, that's nice. And we'll take them and use them. But are they inherently ours? I don't agree with that. This would leave me in trouble here, but I'll do it. The founding documents of our country, while they were influenced by good Christian men, a lot of men who were involved were Christian, I have no doubt about that, and while the Bible had a lot of influence, the documents fundamentally are based not on scriptural understandings, but on Enlightenment understandings. These are roots in the Enlightenment. They are roots in Descartes and John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This is where this stuff is coming from. The whole idea of the social contract, property limits, all this kind of stuff, that's what's driving the founding fathers. And our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution are fundamentally Enlightenment documents. They're not scriptural documents. And I know people try to say, well, they're all Christians. We're a Christian nation. No, I don't buy it.
But even though it's all taking place in the left hand and it's not Christian, Isn't it a search in the left hand for those core values?
It's a search in the left hand for the law. And should the law be saying, we have a responsibility to take care of those who are, do what's right. Not steal from people, give people a chance. That's all great. To me, that's kind of like natural law stuff at work. And the government should be upholding that kind of stuff. I agree with that. And the government can call rights all at once. That's fine. But I'm just saying, as a Christian, we have a kind of a better understanding of what's really going on there. And we recognize it's a left-hand thing. But I'm not going to try to ground it necessarily in God. I'll just ground it in ways to put things together. Should I be treating my neighbor fairly? Well, yeah. That's natural law. Okay? Yep.
Again, I'm really appreciative of all that you have to say. I have two things. First of all, given what he just got done saying over there, how would you then, in understanding what our founding fathers wanted to do, and that is to remove the idea that we get our rights or privileges from the government, how would you have framed that then? Let's see. The other thing is that and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this or not, but there did appear two times in our nation's history. One of them was around 1888, 1889, and then also in 1930, where the Supreme Court actually cited and said, we are a Christian nation.
Right. Okay, so the first one on the Supreme Court saying we are a Christian nation. How you define Christian nation is wide open. I mean, we have mostly Christians living here. We have for a long time. Is that going to change? I think it probably will. But so far we have. So in that sense, we're a Christian nation. Were most of our founding fathers Christians? Absolutely. Some of them were nominally Christian. Some of them were actually full-blown Christians. And I know that. And so there was strong Christian influence. And the dominant religion in our world has always, in our country, has been Christian all the way along, which is fine. So I know that. I'm not discounting that. But I'm just saying that the driving principles that are kind of shaping our Constitution and our idea of balancing the power and stuff, these are fundamentally Enlightenment principles, not scriptural ones. We need to recognize that. Okay? Now I'm trying to remember your first question was, where would you found those rights then? Or how would you found it? Because the move of the founding fathers was to try to get the government out of it and make it more foundational. I don't have a problem with this. I think the idea of a natural law kind of foundation is fine. And did God establish that natural law? Sure. And is that at work in the left hand? Sure. And so we have that kind of thing at work, and we recognize that. But again, as a Christian, I'm not going to say, therefore I have these inherent rights. I might enjoy them, but I'm not going to demand them in a sense. That's kind of where I'm coming from. This is also interesting because you see, probably the biggest driving issue for the founding fathers was the problem of Britain and what to do with that. And they didn't like the whole idea of blind right to kings. So that's what they were fighting against. And that's why they love the social contract of the people driving the power and giving it, rather than the God giving the power to its king and then away you go. So they're just trying to turn the arrows all around. And they did that very successfully. Philosophically, what's behind it, we can go on this debate, and probably going to be less productive. I'll say one more thing, and then I have another thought. One of the reasons why the Constitution seems so amenable to us as Christians is because if you follow the history of the Enlightenment from the time of the Renaissance right up to the present time, about a 500-year history now, you go through Descartes and through all these different steps, you can see a progression of the Enlightenment growing more and more confident in man's capacity, and increasingly under the 18th century, when our country came into shape, it kind of hit the sweet spot in the Enlightenment. In other words, the Enlightenment was right at this place there where God was still playing a role, kind of shunted away, but he was still playing kind of this natural law role. And Jefferson and Washington and Franklin, and these guys all had a place for God, but just not quite the Christ God. They weren't as interested. Washington made it a little different. I'll grant them that. But they had this understanding that God still plays a role, and that's what our country was founded on, which is great. It's this kind of natural law of God stuff, and it works great for the left-hand realm. Well, we've gone now 250-some years later, and we've moved past a lot of that stuff. Now people are saying, oh no, we've moved past our roots. Oh no, the roots were always there. We're just kind of following the progression that was always there. And so we shouldn't be surprised at the increasing godlessness, because the Enlightenment has grown less God-fearing as it's gone along, and that's where we're at. But the founding documents had more of a role because that's where they were at that point. Now, the other thought I was going to suggest to you, and I want to bring this up because no one's brought it up yet, is this whole question about tax-exempt status. How involved can a church get before we're not lose our tax-exempt status? Because we have this idea as Christians, well, that you can't say that in church. Who says? Who says you can't say something? Is there a list that we hand to the pastors? Now, when you're a pastor in the pulpit, you can talk about this, but not this. Here's the official list. No, there isn't one. There's no God list of what you can talk about. The only reason we say you can't do that is because somebody has said that, well, if you do that, you might lose your tax-exempt status. What's tax-exempt status? Tax-exempt status is a government handout to the church. It's the government saying, we like what you're doing in the church, so we're not going to tax you. Is it our right as churches not to be taxed? It's not. It's not. It's a nice perk. Great. It saves us a ton of money. But is it our right? Spare me. No. And look at the government next week decide we're going to start taxing churches. Yeah. All we can say is, you've never done that before. And that's it. And frankly, I'm of the opinion, I think it'd be great if they did. Because if the church started paying taxes like everybody else, maybe we start having a little more of a voice instead of running around being all mealy-mouthed. See, one of the great temptations of the church is to kind of just shut up and let the government do its thing. And that's exactly what the government wants. And so one of the dangers is that you have this situation where the state, the government, co-opts the church for its purpose. So we trot God out at the end of every speech, God bless America, and we bring God out at the inauguration, have some guy stand up and give us a prayer. There. Now we've baptized us all with all kinds of God stuff. Now it's all legitimate. But now, what role does God in His law play from then on? Nothing. He's just shunned it off into the background. Get away. We don't want you anymore. You've done your purpose. And we in the church for too long have said, oh, we got to go to the inauguration and do a prayer. Isn't that cool? Come on! Wake up! You're getting used. We're getting used. And we're getting used by both sides. It's not just, less. Everybody should do this. And we need to recognize that. And so maybe it's time for us in the church to say, we don't want tax-exempt status. We'll pay our taxes, whatever it takes, and we're going to start speaking out on things. We're not afraid anymore. That'd be cool. I think. So let's get over this sacred cow of tax-exempt status. Whatever. It's just a handout. It's part of Constantinianism, but that's another discussion. I don't have time for that. All right, let's get back.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, you just shifted the position.
Now I hear people saying, I can't vote for a woman.
All right. I'm glad you brought that up specifically.
What is this?
Someone says, I can't vote for a Mormon. Well, if you're thinking this through left hand, right hand, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because we're thinking left hand, we're looking for someone who's going to be just and upright. And whether you think the guy's going to be just and upright and perform the law, that's what you're looking for. And honestly, brother, whatever you think about Romney, I'm not even talking about that. A Mormon in general probably is cut out very well for being a very good, just, moral guy. Because he's worked hard for his salvation. want a guy who's trying to earn his salvation, trying to do the right thing? I'll take it. And that's why Mormons make great neighbors. They really do. They're great neighbors. They take care of their lawn, they're nice, and do all these kinds of great things. They're using you to earn their salvation. That's all right, I'll take it. That's fine. So, in other words, I don't mean to be flippant about this, but to me, a Christian should not even think twice about the religious conviction of this particular candidate. He should think about is the character of that candidate, where he stands on fundamental moral issues. That's what he should be thinking about. And that's what matters. So should you grimace voting for that person because of his faith? No. You might grimace because you think he's a moron on some issues, or is wrong, right on these issues. And you might have some issues where I wish he had this position, and so you never quite get it exactly right. In the left hand, you often have to make compromises and then ask for God's forgiveness on the way out of the voting booth. But you vote for what's best. That's what you got to do.
Well, that leads me right into my question about sinning in the voting booth. Because we have a dispersion of powers in the left hand in this country.
Yes.
Unlike any other country, nobody's got more layers of government than we do.
That's right.
Thank God. I mean, because we get so particularly at the local level rather than at the national level. I may find a local leader who has a position on something on one of those moral core issues, but he doesn't really get a chance to. A mayor or a county councilman doesn't really get to vote on abortion and gay rights.
This is a good point. So you're asking that on the local level, how much do these kinds of core issues matter on the local level? Because we have these layers of government. And so maybe you have a local guy who's running, who's going to do a really good job for your city council and be a just, straight shooter, fight for what's right, but he espouses positions which are irrelevant because he can't do anything about abortion or gay rights, but he maybe has his positions. On the gay rights, he might.
He might.
So I think,
particularly as he does housing legislation in your neighborhood.
Exactly.
And
that's right. So you might want to take those. I think it still needs to come into play. And if you've got choices between candidates, you need to say which one is going to more closely conform to what God would have you do in office. That's what you got to do. And sometimes you have to make choices. Sometimes you have to vote between lesser of two evils. Sometimes you go for that third-party candidate, which I think is a throwaway vote. So don't do that. But you have to make those kinds of choices. Way over here, I saw it.
Well, you kind of addressed it just now, but sometimes I feel like I go into the voting booth and there's two choices, basically two choices.
Yeah.
And either way, I'm sitting in the voting booth.
All right.
Do I write my own name in, or how do I do that?
Writing your own name or somebody else's name?
Don't mind.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, if you're the best candidate, go for it. So what do you do when you're in the voting booth and both choices seem to be wrong and there's problems to vote for? That will happen, and it probably happens most of the time. Because when we're living as Christians, we want God's law to be upheld, and we see errors in maybe both candidates. And so then it's a matter of saying, okay, now I'm responsible. I've got to think through who is most nearly going to conform to God's reality, who's most nearly going to conform to God's truth. And that's what you vote for. And you vote, and you say, God, if I was wrong in this, please forgive me. And you know you have His forgiveness, but you still have to be active. And see, this is what happens in the left hand. Because in the left hand, things aren't neat and clean. And this is what bothers a lot of Christians. Because a lot of Christians, we tend to be really clean-cut, black and white, boom, God's law says this. And the left hand, we see people compromising. And we get all worked up. But you see, the left hand is built on compromise. It's how it works. And the left hand, you have to work towards things, towards peace, towards justice, working toward it. And so sometimes you say, this guy's wrong, this guy's more wrong, so I'll vote for the first one and ask God for His forgiveness and work for a better candidate next time. And that's what you do. So, because and that's the thing. So in the left-hand world, you do get kind of dirty sometimes in the left-hand world. And you maybe fight for a policy which is less than ideal, but at least it's going in the right direction. So you fight for those things if you can. You're working toward where we should be. And that's what you do in the left hand. And as Christians, knowing we have God's forgiveness, we can get dirty in the left hand. It's okay. We need to. We can't just stay away because, oops, I might get dirty. That's that quietism again. We can't do that. So a new hand over here, yes.
So do you see potential pitfalls for Christians being involved in the left-hand realm and advocates for religious freedom? Since religious freedom for one religion is religious freedom.
Okay, are there any pitfalls for a Christian being active in the left-hand realm as an advocate for religious freedom, since religious freedom is religious freedom for everybody? Yeah, that's true, it is. I guess I've always had the opinion that Christianity can take on any claims and we'll be fine. Because it's God's truth, we have nothing to be afraid of. So other religions can do what they want to do, and that's what I'm saying. Muslims and Christians have lived side by side before. I'm not too concerned about that. I get a little more concerned about us starting to fight for religious freedom as our rights. I don't like that. And I don't like it very much when the church starts, hey, you're stepping on our rights here. I don't think that's really good. I'd rather see the church say, we're going to do what we want to do. If the government recognizes the value in our contribution to society, great. If they don't, that's their call. I mean, the early church did not have religious freedom. But they still worshiped, and they flourished. And sometimes persecution is really good for the church. And it doesn't make us excited to hear that, but it's true. And so I'm all for, if the government wants to give me religious freedom, fine, I'll take it. But start fighting for it, I'm not that keen about that. Not because I'm worried about other religions getting freedom. I'm more concerned about just what we end up losing track of how it's supposed to function in society. All right, some new people, yes?
Well, kind of like following on to that, there's some movements for Sharia law. So,
Yeah. Well, yeah, Sharia law would there's some definite problems with this because it's going beyond the natural law. It's, it's not being just. And so, yeah, do we want to have Sharia law imposed? No. Do we try to work against that? Well, of course we would.
What is Sharia law?
Sharia law is Islam, the enforcing Muslim understanding of what's true and right on everybody. All right, somebody else. I saw a new hand. There it is. Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about the gentleman talking about the city council. Sometimes you know how they stand on the core issues and sometimes you don't. But my thinking is everybody who's a senator or a congressman or a president started out on somebody's city council.
Fair enough. Yeah, people who are higher up in office started somewhere. And so maybe you don't know where they stand on the core issues, but they got their start somewhere. And if we can start at the local level of putting people in office who are supporting God's truth, it's probably a good first step. And that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. That's a very good, valid point. All right. Yes.
In your listing of the characteristics of God's two hands, on the left hand you had the sword, and I immediately thought on the right hand of excommunication,
yes.
Christian discipline.
Yes.
So you put the word, but would you view excommunication as an application of the word?
Absolutely. The question is, where does excommunication fit? Because you now have the two columns up there, and sword, and if you're assuming of the excommunication up there, I put the word. Well, the word is the sharp double-edged sword. Paul uses that analogy, and we bind and we loose. And so we forgive sins, and when somebody is not repentant, we excommunicate. And that's still the word. We don't put teeth into it by taking away their property or incarcerating them, but we say, hey, you're not part of the church. And all we have is that word of admonition to them. So that's still the word at work. Absolutely. Excommunication is the word. Yep. One more?
From someone watching on the internet.
Oh, okay.
Wants to know whether Dr. Merriman thinks it was right for Bonhoeffer to be involved in the intent on Hitler's life.
Okay, question about Bonhoeffer, whether or not it was right for Bonhoeffer to be involved in the intent on Hitler's life. This is a great question, because Bonhoeffer wants to be obedient to the government, Romans 13, and at the same time, Bonhoeffer wants to protect those who are being hurt. And there were plenty of people being killed, and he knew that. People were becoming aware of what Hitler was doing. So Bonhoeffer made the decision to be civilly disobedient and to work to actually kill his leader, which is rebellion in a sense. And I would say Bonhoeffer knew that, and so he made the choice he needed to make. The beautiful thing about the Christian life is we don't have to judge other people's actions. Only God does that. We look at those actions, we say, does it make sense? Is it legitimate? And I look at what Bonhoeffer did and I say, it makes sense, it's legitimate, I can see the reason in what he did. But it's interesting that Bonhoeffer didn't say that everybody should do what he did. Nor did he say, everybody should be following me in this. He recognized he had to make this decision. And it's also interesting about Bonhoeffer that he understood that he was putting himself at odds with the state, and when he was executed, that's what happens. He knew that going in. It's not like he said, wait, you can't do this to me, because I was doing something that was right. He understood he was doing something that put him outside the law, but he did it anyway. That's what civil disobedience is. And are there times in our Christian life when we are called in our faithfulness to be civilly disobedient? Yes. Those times have to be determined by you, the individual, and you have to be confident you're doing what God calls you to do, and you do it, and you take responsibility for it. And that's the key. So I would say, I'd be content with what Bonhoeffer did, but am I ready to say that's a norm for everybody? No. And I don't think it would be. I'm past 11, so I'm going to call it a day and let you guys, he's been very attentive, and if you have questions for me individually, come up and talk to me, and I'll be happy to do that. One more, because you didn't ask.
Yes, please. I have to address this because I'm still having problems with it, particularly, or especially with what the pastor said. A sin is a sin.
Yes.
And we tend to put value on different sins.
Mm-hmm.
God does not.
Mm-hmm.
When he said that he could not commune with a person, I'm assuming, who normally votes for Obama or some, God gives us free choice. God is pro-choice. He wants you to choose life. And my problem or my concern is nobody is perfect. And people who tell lies as they get in office and what have you.
Sure.
And you mentioned before the greater, lesser of the evils.
Mm-hmm.
I came here to try to get some clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Still confused, but I'm also concerned about, should you vote for a person just on one or two issues?
The question is, should you vote for a person just on one or two issues? And in a sense, I would say, if it's an issue that's a central core issue, yes. I think so. I think you should. And your point of sin is sin, and we sin in lots of ways, and do we single out just the sin that really bothers us? No, we always have to be careful of this. And that's why I try to be very clear when I answer this question, that what this would be, you need to have lots of conversation with somebody about what the issues are, what's going on here, and make sure that they are willfully choosing to violate God's will. And if they are, then that becomes a sin issue. If they're doing it out of ignorance or not understanding things, then you are much more, you keep on working with them. And you keep on working with them. So I'm not ready to say, boom, that's a clear-cut kind of thing. It might be, if they've been educated and still don't care, then that becomes a different issue. And you're right, people sin in lots of ways, and we need to be attentive to all that. I agree with that. So far as your comment about God being pro-choice, I disagree. As far as God giving us a choice, I disagree. I don't believe in free will. I believe that as Christians, we need to be informed, and that's another whole can of worms. But I don't believe in free will. I believe that we as humans have a bent, broken will, and we always do what's wrong. Only by God's grace are we given freedom to have this forgiveness. And now our job is to be conformed to Him. That's why St. Paul said we are now slaves to Christ. So He gives me my direction. He gives me my lead, and that's what I do. So free will? No, it's God's will. I want to conform to that. Thank you so much for your time and for your